Hello team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a US elections special where I'm going to be talking about the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, that's just taken place over 4 days. I'm going to do a little bit of comparison to the RNC, the Republican version of it that took place previously, and show that they're chalk and cheese, and look at which will have more of an effect on polling, and which was done better, which was organised better, who had the better speakers, etc., etc. There's way too much for me to discuss in this video because each of these conventions went on for 4 days and they had multiple speakers every day, and I'd love to just analyse all of the speeches. But the TLDR of this is that the Democrats did an absolutely spankingly good job of producing and delivering a convention with a range of speakers that were very tightly set up around the themes of unity and of trying to take away voters from the other side. So remember, all of my videos start with this idea that there's no point preaching to the choir at the moment. You are campaigning, and you've got to assume, each party has to assume that you've got your base. Both of them are enthused, both bases are enthused enough now to get out and vote for your party, right? So your first goal is to make sure that you enthuse that base, that they are motivated and they're going to go out and vote. And your second objective is get all of those people who are either independents, swing voters, those in the middle, or steal some of the voters from the other party. And you've got to consider all these different demographics, as I always talk about, these different categories of people. Who has done a better job of reaching across the aisle to steal some of the supporters, the electorate from the other party? Did the GOP do that? Did Trump do that in the RNC, in their convention? Was it enthusiastically enough received by not just the MAGA and GOP voters that would have been watching on TV, but those curious other voters watching to see whether actually Trump's the right guy for them, to see whether the GOP ticket and agenda is right for them? Did the GOP do enough to steal voters from the Democrats, from the swing voters and the independents? I don't think the RNC was anything particularly special. In fact, I think Trump, it was quite narcissistic. There was a lot of talk, a lot of acquiescing to the will, obsequiously giving praise to Donald Trump. It was all about Trump and less about policy, agenda, and themes that are greater than just Trump or just immigration. So when they were picking themes, they were divisive themes that were not positive, that were like trying to spread fear. And we'll return to this in a little while as well. And I don't think that they were unifying enough. You need to be unifying in order to steal voters from these other groups. Now, the first thing to note of the DNC, as Michael Weiss here says, is the Democratic Convention is turning out to be the most bipartisan event in the last 4 years. So what was really interesting, and this was of course incredibly purposeful, is that there were at least 7 speakers who were Republicans spread across the 4 days. Okay, so that is incredibly important. You had obviously Adam Kinzinger, who is an ever-Trumper now, who spoke up very strongly on particularly foreign policy. So he was there speaking as a Republican. You have, who else? Let's go down and look at some of these. Former Trump voter Carl Sweetser speaks on stage during his second day at the DNC. I voted for Trump not once, not twice, but 3 times. You see, I work in construction. I work with my hands. He told us he'd look out for blue-collar workers. So I made my first ever political contribution to Trump, and I donated to him many times throughout his presidency, Carl Sweetser of Alabama said during his DNC speech Tuesday night. But then I started to see Trump's tariff policy in action. Costs for construction workers like me was starting to soar. I realized that Trump wasn't for me. He was lining his own pocket. Sweetser said he's not left-wing, period, but I believe our leaders should bring out the best in us, not the worst. So that's really interesting. There's your working class construction worker blue collar worker that is going to appeal, hopefully, say the Democrats, to your Republican blue collar worker that is going to be maybe think that immigration is really important, that this is really important, that looking after the worker is really important, but actually it could be that the Democratic Party is for you. And actually having the auto worker union boss up there speaking as well was really important. So who else did we have? Former Georgia Republican Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan standing up, and he got a standing ovation when he said that the 2020 election disqualified him from ever stepping foot into the Oval Office again. So that was January the 6th, and trying to overthrow the election in Georgia, particularly, remember, we're trying to get 11,000 odd votes. So then you had, who else did you have? Here we have, former Trump White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham, and I think I've got her. Did I get rid of it? No, here she is. So she was, again, very strongly standing up against Trump's GOP, and basically she was talking about how she didn't want to lie, and working for Trump was kind of working for a lie. On a hospital visit one time when people were dying in the ICU, he was mad the cameras were not watching him, Grisham alleged. He has no empathy, no morals, and no fidelity to the truth. He used to tell me, it doesn't matter what you say, Stephanie, say it enough and people will believe you. But it does matter. What you say matters, and what you don't say matters. I never wanted to stand at the podium and lie. Now I'm here at a podium and advocating for a Democrat, and that's because I love my country more than my party. And that's what Kinzinger said as well. He said, I'm standing here because I love my country more than my party. It's putting country first. And at the moment, these people are saying that the GOP is not the country, is not the party to support. To support the US is not the party that's going to be good for the people of the US, and indeed the people of the wider world, as those interested in foreign policy would be stating as well, like Adam Kinzinger. Then another Trump administration veteran, Olivia Troy, former Homeland Security aide to Mike Pence, talked about her experiences and then advocating for Harris. Then you've got Mesa, Arizona Mayor John Giles, beginning his speech saying, I have a confession to make. I'm a lifelong Republican. I feel a little out of place tonight, but I feel more at home here than in today's Republican Party. The grand old party has been kidnapped by extremists and evolved into a cult, the cult of Donald Trump, blah, blah, blah. And this is somewhat similar to what Adam Kinzinger was saying. So one of the themes for the whole convention was, in my opinion, this was not a convention that was leaning into the left wing at all and leaning into what you might think would be an important aspect of the Democratic base. It's actually going the other way. And this is sort of what Keir Starmer did in the last elections, go to the centre ground. So if you note, like, even when AOC, so Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who spoke on the first day and gave an absolutely rip-roaringly good speech, but she didn't go to her usual firebrand left-wing talking points. She kept it fairly, yes, she was talking about having, humanitarian empathy for those in Gaza, but in general terms, like, even those like Elizabeth Warren were talking in ways that would appeal to the centre. This was a very centrist DNC. It's not going to be painted that by the Republicans, of course it won't be. But in reality, that's exactly what it was. And you can tell because 7 of the frickin' speakers were Republicans who were saying, I ain't a lefty. But here you go. And the left-wing Democratic speakers were not saying, even Kamala Harris's speech didn't even mention Democrats, I think. Or very few times. There were some really key things that were massively absent from this DNC that you would otherwise have expected to be there, because the theme was stealing voters from the middle and from the other party, giving a permission structure for those in the Republican Party to come over to the Democrats. Here's Adam Kinzinger.
Vision of a strong America, the shining city on a hill. I was a Republican for 12 years in Congress, and I still hold on to the label. I never thought I'd be here, but listen, you never thought you'd see me here, did you? But I've learned something about the Democratic Party, and I want to let my fellow Republicans in on the secret. The Democrats are as patriotic as us.
So, the other thing to notice here is that patriotism and a sense of national identity and pride in nationhood was on show at the DNC big time. What you've got here with having these Republicans, it's a bit like when you watch reaction videos of, like, say you like Iron Maiden as a heavy metal band, and you're like, oh, I love Iron Maiden, and then you watch, say, a black rapper react to Iron Maiden, then love Iron Maiden. You're like, yeah, you validated, you are outside of you, you are not me. There are aspects of your identity which are completely not me, and yet you are validating me by validating music that I love, right? These are really common things on the internet. So you see reaction videos, but it's when they are people outside of the norm to you, like people who are rap fans liking your music type, or vice versa, whatever it is. And then you get that sense of validation yourself, but it's also a permission structure for other people to go, oh, he likes that, maybe I'll like that. So you've got Adam Kinzinger and all these Republicans doing that, providing that permission structure, but also getting these guys are loving it when they hear someone from the other side come in and say, I am with you guys now. But then talking in terms of patriotism, that's a really interesting thing to feature at a DNC. Look at the amount of American flags.
They love this country just as much as we do.
Democrats love this country just as much as we do, as Republicans. Don Cheadle there.
And they are as eager to defend American values at home and abroad as we conservatives have ever been.
So another thing that you're going to notice is that, and he talks about this explicitly, is that the Democrats are taking on some of the positions that used to be the hallmarks of republicanism. So being strong on foreign policy, being strong on wars, being strong on, being patriotic. You had Eric Bolling coming out, who's a super conservative former Newsmax and Fox host, coming out and saying we're effing losing. So he did a whole thing on his channel, which the news channels are now reporting on. CNN were running it last night, of Eric Bolling going, we're effing losing this now. They've even got camo caps. And he said camo caps used to be ours, as in like only Republicans could wear camouflage because it's like kind of hunting, guns, war. Camo used to be ours, and they've got camo caps with the Harris Walls. Like, what's going on? And they've even sold out until September, until the back end of September, I think. Like, pay attention to stuff like this. This is very strategically thought through, right? There is no accident that you've got camo caps, right? There's no accident you've got Kinzinger talking about patriotism and chants of USA going on.
I was relieved to discover that because I've learned something about my party too, something I couldn't ignore. The Republican Party is no longer conservative. It has switched its allegiance from the principles that gave it purpose to a man whose only purpose is himself.
And that's another thing you see repeated an awful lot. It happened in Kamala Harris's speech and other people's speech that actually, and it's true, I would say it's absolutely, this isn't like spinning anything. Trump is narcissistic and he's only interested in himself. You listen to his speeches, he just talks about himself the whole time. He doesn't talk about this thing that's bigger than him. So the Democrats have gone hard on service. Right, there's a lot of talk about service. Tim Walz's speech was service as in the National Guard, as a teacher and as a coach. And then as a politician who wasn't involved in kind of political party positioning, but was involved in just serving his community. And that talk of neighbours and neighbourhood, Kamala Harris does it in her speech, talking about serving as a prosecutor, and then that juxtaposition of prosecutor against felon as Trump is. And here we have this idea of service and serving something that's bigger than you, whereas Trump is wanting everyone to serve him. He is the biggest thing. So that's that pyramid I talked about previously, where Trump is interested in being at the top of the pyramid, whereas the Democrats, or at least as they would have you believe, are interested in serving. So it's like an inverted pyramid where they're serving the public, and it's the public who are top. It's the citizen, it's the US, it's this idea of something that's bigger than me as an individual. I am, and I talked about this previously in religious terms, I'm not a religious person, but the idea in Christianity is that Jesus was a servant king. So he's a king that serves you. And that's why he came down and washed the feet of the disciples. Like, I am your king, but I am serving you. Right. So this is what the Democrats are going hard on in the DNC and in their campaigns, is service. And they're juxtaposing that against Trump, who would never do that. He would never get on his feet and never get on his knees and wash the feet of others to serve them. He expects to be served. Think about what he said about Kim Jong-un and his love of dictators.
Donald Trump is a weak man pretending to be strong. He is a small man pretending to be big. He's a faithless man pretending to be righteous. He's a perpetrator who can't stop playing the victim. He puts on, listen, he puts on quite a show, but there is no real strength there. As a conservative and a veteran, I believe true strength lies in defending the vulnerable. It's in protecting your family. It's in standing up for our Constitution and our democracy. That is the soul of being a conservative. It used to be the soul of being a Republican, but Donald Trump has suffocated the soul of the Republican Party.
And what's interesting there, he's saying, so you can be a conservative, you can self-identify as a conservative and vote Democrat, because they are going to be the party standing up for these conservative ideals of the Constitution, of, you know, all those things that he's just talked about. So he's differentiating conservative from GOP, from Republican, and saying you can split those labels apart, and you can still be a conservative but not vote Republican. And that's a very interesting approach. Now, you've got similar kind of analysis here come from Tim Miller as he speaks to Morning Joe here, Joe Scarborough, on MSNBC. But you've got the conservative, although he's a never Trumper at Bulwark now, Tim Miller, talking about this idea of patriotism.
Parties. It was like the old Simpsons cartoon where they had Republican conventions and they held up banners that said, "We don't care about people." Then they go to the Democratic convention, they held up banners that said, "We can't run things," right? Yeah, we can't run things. And this is a Democratic Party, I mean, just ruthlessly efficient. I have not seen a convention night after night after night that sets it up this well. This is not the Democratic Party that you and I are used to seeing.
No, the way that they co-opted all these traditional Republican themes, now they aren't Republican values really, but Republican themes. Absolutely. Last night was, you know, there's been a lot of talk about the freedom, the way they've co-opted that word. But last night it was much more than that. The patriotism, there's the USA placards, there were more USA chants at the Democratic convention than the Republican convention. I think that there was more mention of God and the Bible. You saw that in a lot of speeches, like Hakeem Jeffries, Oprah, Tim Walz. That you saw last night. Football, obviously. Patriotism, talking about the Olympic team. The Republicans are complaining there were drag queens in the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. You know, last night they're like, "We love our Olympic heroes, yay!" I know it's like a very American.
It's a really interesting point there from Tim Miller. All of those things have been taken back by the Democrats. Say, look, these aren't the purview. These aren't the exclusivity of the Republican Party. We're going to own patriotism and pride in our Olympic heroes and chanting USA and talking about God and stuff like that.
Heartland America thematically, and that was, you know, obviously very savvy, and it's something that sometimes Democrats in the past were uncomfortable with or ran away from. Right. Not last night.
And I've seen a number of analyses. I think Bill Kristol was talking about this. I saw it on the Rest is Politics US, where they were saying that this convention has really gone down the center ground, and they are appealing to those themes and topics that will press buttons for swing voters and independents and Republicans. Really super important. Michael Weiss says, leave to one side all the Republicans who spoke to bury Trump. There was also a culturally conservative through line to this convention, very pro-military and pro-family. So they talk a lot about family and the freedoms. When they talk about freedom, it's within the confines of freedom for your family. The government shouldn't look into what's happening inside our house, stay out of our lives. That kind of thing that you normally hear from libertarians and Republicans in terms of government regulation. They're kind of co-opting that for and spinning it in a slightly different way there. So as Michael Weiss here says, they want GOP voters. This is abundantly clear. And I think it was incredibly well devised in that way. This is what Anthony Scaramucci on the rest of his US politics says. He was a former Trump man for 11 days before being fired. He's a really astute analyst nowadays. And the podcast with Katty Kay here, the rest of his politics US, is particularly good, always.
No one will.
I want to step back for a second and go over programming, because I thought the programming tonight was pitch perfect. When I read the itinerary and I read the message that they were trying to deliver, I thought it was pitch perfect, right? They were trying to present somebody that could unify the country. Kissinger, I thought his speech.
Kinzinger, he means.
I thought Leon Panetta's speech was gold. The governor from North Carolina, Roy Cooper.
Short and sweet. And that was good.
He wants her to win, Caddy. Mm-hmm. He wants her to win. You could feel it coming through the television. And so if you're
and by the way, we'll return to this idea of authenticity a bit later.
Television producer, you're like, what am I going to do tonight? I want to introduce this woman that many Americans don't know, many people around
Kamala
the world
Harris.
don't know. Political aficionados like you and me know, but let's introduce her. And it was family. It was unity. It was, and I just said this on X. Trump is so divisive. Is he actually uniting us against him? Is he the American Putin? And just give me 1 second on this. Putin saw NATO so divided. Putin saw NATO crumbling, and his move into the Ukraine had the opposite effect. Instead of cracking NATO, everybody got united. I'm just wondering if the great divider, Donald Trump, ends up being the force that puts enough of us together that begins the healing process for the country. So, and just two more quick things. She was fantastic tonight. I mean,
so this is then going across. So this is day 4. Kamala Harris as the last speaker, and singing her praises in the way that she delivered that speech.
Not saying that with any hyperbole. I went to law school. First thing you learn in trial advocacy, you have to make the case for yourself, and you have to make the case against the other side. And that was a trial advocacy A+. It was a dream. If that woman was in court presenting that case to the judge, it was, I'm a good person. I got raised right. I love my country. And oh, by the way, I love you. Okay, now Americans have a tendency, they can vote for somebody that they dislike. They gave Richard Nixon a landslide in 72. They voted him in 68. They didn't like him. But what they don't like voting for people that dislike them. And that's where Trump is going to find trouble here, because Vice President Harris came out tonight and said, by the way, I get our alliances. I know who we are in the world. It's an amazing country. Whatever racism anybody has faced in this country, my African-American father, my Indian-American mother, it doesn't matter. I have this undying love affair for the country.
So, and he's absolutely right. The one of the massive themes throughout all the 4 days was unity, and it came from Tim Walz's speech and Kamala Harris's speech, and everyone's speech talks about this idea of unity. That was definitely big for them, and I think the whole thing was so tightly produced, but also scripted. Yeah, all of these are scripted. Like, and you have writers working on everyone's speeches, right? But they were all coherent. There was not like someone speaking about something completely random or having their own little agenda. Everybody, and this is why it was interesting when you had Elizabeth Warren and AOC, who could have gone off on their own to achieve their own little objectives there. Everyone was working towards this goal. It was, and it shouldn't be taken for granted. The DNC was a masterpiece of planning. Some of the speeches were too long, but essentially they were all very, very well knitted together. Now, talking about the quality of the speeches on offer at the DNC, and especially if you compare them to the RNC, I just think it was a different level, rhetorically, oratorically speaking. And this is what, from the rest of this Politics, the UK version, this is what Rory Stewart talks about here.
He had no choice because there were so many people trying to get in. You had to get in there about 3 hours in advance. Now, we were very, very lucky. We struck lucky, Rory, in that we found this guy who offered his seats in one of the boxes, the sort of corporate boxes. So that meant we could sort of come and go a bit. But otherwise, you had to literally get in there 3 hours before. Otherwise, you wouldn't get a seat.
So just to talk, first of all, it was deeply, deeply popular. Like, everyone wanted to be there.
And the result, though, is that it's so well done that you can do it. I mean, that's what astonished me. On that first night with you, I guess we sat for, we left at midnight, sat down just after 7. So 4.5 hours, I guess we sat there. I would never sit for 4.5 hours without moving through a Labour or Conservative conference, I'm afraid. And that's, I think, the main message that I took away from it. The quality of the speaking is unbelievable. I mean, what the Democratic Party revealed in the last 4 days is they are able to mobilize some of the most astonishing public speakers that you've ever seen. In fact, if you were doing So
again, don't take this for granted. Like, this takes a lot of work, and for all of those themes to work in consonance, to cohere and be knitted together in this patchwork quilt, that isn't chaos, and it is all really well thought through and very polished and strategically inclined. It was just incredibly well done.
A class for students on public oratory and communication. You could take probably 12 of those speeches and play them to them, and every one of them has a different style and mic. And I'm afraid, sadly, I don't want to be rude to Britain, but I do not think we could produce half a dozen speakers of that quality.
No, and if you think that not that long ago, there were something that you'd hear people say right around the world is, how can a country of 355 million people produce a choice between Biden and Trump? Okay.
Right.
But actually, I agree with you. And some of them quite surprising. Pete Buttigieg, who I think is an amazing television communicator, I realized this week is also a fantastic orator. We had Gretchen, Gretchen Whitmer last night.
Yep.
She was absolutely brilliant.
Governor of Michigan.
Yeah. Josh Shapiro was
Governor of Pennsylvania.
Was absolutely superb. Matt Kelly was good. And then they had all these, way that they brought speakers out who weren't famous, weren't well known. Some of the most powerful. Late yesterday, a woman who actually has become a congresswoman, whose son was killed by shooting, and talking about guns. And then this amazing where Senator Kelly came on with his wife,
Mark Kelly,
Gabrielle Giffords, who survived an assassination attempt. So they use these interweaving personal stories with this sort of big picture. And as I said the other day, for example, on abortion, which really has been such a big thing this week. And I think that goes back to my point. I think they are deliberately using women. And as you say, and it's interesting how many people mentioned to me, the woman, the delegate that Katty Kay interviewed on The Rest is Politics US, just these incredibly articulate young women who now are going out of here and they're going to try and persuade their friends and persuade their mothers and persuade their fathers. So that's the sort of energy that's been going. But the other...
So a lot of ideas there that women featured very prominently, both in the audience, but also in the speakers, some of the very best speakers, Kamala Harris, obviously, And then you have Oprah Winfrey was incredibly well received. You had Michelle Obama, of course, Hillary Clinton, some of these big hitters, and also some of the smaller people, and then Elizabeth Warren and so on. So women were AOC was phenomenal on the first day. So really, really important that, especially when one of the themes is reproductive rights, abortion, IVF, contraception. All of those are featuring massively in the campaign, and therefore the topics of the speeches and the people delivering them were tailored towards those suburban women voters and so on and so forth up and down the country. And you had, of course, the famous Obama quip here.
Here's a 78-year-old billionaire who has not stopped whining about his problems since he rode down his golden escalator 9 years ago. It has been a constant stream of gripes and grievances that's actually been getting worse now that he's afraid of losing to Kamala. There's the childish nicknames, the crazy conspiracy theories, this weird obsession with crowd sizes.
It's the little glance down. It's brilliantly done. Of course, we all know what he's really talking about.
Conspiracy theories. This weird obsession with crowd sizes.
She's perfect. Perfect.
It just goes on and on and on.
So there you go. And Obama, I could play you parts of all of their speeches. Absolutely, some absolute humdingers of speeches throughout this whole DNC. Now, the reactions, of course, to Obama, because he had, and Michelle Obama actually was even better, really unifying, but also having some really big digs at Trump. A cat turd who is Elon Musk's best mate is basically a complete, it's very much a right winger on Twitter, very, very prominent. And Gunter Eagleman saying, I blame this MFer, talking about Obama there. So blaming him for the success or blaming him for whatever. No doubt, says Cat Turd, this evil demon from hell is responsible for everything going bad in our country right now. Despite a 4-year Trump tenure in between Obama and then another 4 years. So 8 years ago, it's still all Obama's fault. So yeah, there you go. So what was also incredibly well executed was that on the day of the roll call. So the roll call is where you go out to all the different delegates from the different states and you say, right, who are you voting for? And they say Kamala Harris, etc., by however many delegate votes. And then you're like, yeah, I'm duly accept your nomination. Now, what they did, and this was, not only did it take meticulous planning, but it was also really well executed. They had going live from the roll call to where Trump had his, was it the RNC itself, and they packed out this alternative stadium with a Waltz Harris rally. So they had 2 packed out stadiums going on at the same time. And it was just insane. And they went live. They did a live feed back to the initial DNC. Just incredible. I don't want to get done for that.
And hello to everyone joining us from exciting Chicago. The delegates at the Democratic National Convention, well, they just completed their roll call. And they have nominated Coach Walz and me to be the next Vice President and President of the United States of America.
Think about how she's dressed. Does she look presidential? Is she happy? Is she unifying? Yes, this is all positive. It's joyous. Joy was a big theme that went through the whole of the DNC. But there she is, Ann Waltz, at a packed out, really enthused entire other arena, right? And then being screened live back at the DNC, which is itself packed out. Now, speaking about the roll call, what the Democrats also did that was phenomenally good was they brought music in for the first time ever to the roll call. And the roll call, if you compare the RNC to the DNC, the roll call was electric for the DNC.
And 263 vote for freedom.
California, we proudly cast our 482 votes for the next president, Kamala Harris.
So what you had is this DJ Cassidy doing a DJ set, and each state had a song that was either from that state or relevant to that state in some way thematically. And DJ Cassidy had been working for a month with all of the delegates to make sure that everyone was happy with the songs. And then it was like a big party atmosphere that then just built up. It was all about a spectacle, so that if you're watching this on TV, it's not some nerdy thing that you get bored with. Suddenly you've got music, you've got excitement, you've got cheering, you've got people that are super, super happy.
But now, a special surprise, live from my home state of Wisconsin, Vice President Kamala Harris.
The delegates at the
And that's where it then goes live across to Kamala Harris, as we just saw. Now let's see what the Pod Save America team have to say about that.
Democratic National Convention. Well, they just completed their roll call, and they have nominated Coach Walz and me to be America.
They filled the Fiserv Forum, which is where the Republican convention was last month.
Yep.
And it was a raucous crowd and a perfect set, and they did it live, which is a risky maneuver.
Two full stadiums.
Well,
Yeah.
especially
Cool.
for all the issues last night with going over, the fact that they orchestrated the whole thing tonight so that literally like the roll call ends and Newsom puts her over the top in California, and then it just cuts to her walking out on stage
Awesome.
with a
Yeah.
huge crowd. It was amazing.
It was so good.
The stagecraft, like a lot of people had a hand in that probably don't get a lot of credit. That's amazing.
It was just so people like we were all watching it, and we were just such earnest. We were just so earnestly like excited, and it, like just sort of that's so fucking cool.
Yeah.
Don't look at me and Dan. You know we weren't here. We were up in a suite.
Well, Dan was.
I was sitting right here.
I
You were
missed it
talking
all.
with your
I
daughter
was very
and your
sad.
wife.
Yeah.
Oh, that's when it happened. Oh, I was doing Itsy Bitsy Spider with
This is-
Lizzie.
Yeah.
I thought we were in the
Which is
suite.
fair. Which is totally
Yeah,
that was
it's a good excuse.
What'd you guys think of the vibes in general? Before we get to the big speakers,
Vibes are good.
vibes are good, right?
Vibes are good.
It
Vibes
was
are
a good day.
We're
Very good
drinking
day
now.
there.
We're having.
So, and that was on the second day, and they were like, stagecraft was amazing. To do that was just a phenomenal achievement. Okay, so then we're going to go to have a little think about this, the stagecraft involved and the music involved in DJ Cassidy.
My name is DJ Cassidy, and I'd like to welcome you all to the Democratic National Convention roll call.
Now, just think about that. Like, welcome to the Democratic National Convention roll call. Normally, it's just like people going, 412 vote, 38 delegates vote for John Smith. Thank you. And it's like, hey, welcome to the party. You got the party atmosphere. So if you're watching this, how is this affecting your appreciation of what's going on? Is it going to get you to watch longer? Do you get sucked in and then sucked into watching the speeches and then watching this on multiple days? This is very well thought through.
The great state of California. How do you cast your vote? Georgia. How do
And then you had Lil Jon. So this is appealing to young people. You've got Lil Jon coming down and being there live.
you cast your vote?
So he came down and then gave him like a rap and then introduced yours. It was absolutely brilliant. I mean, the whole thing was just really well thought through. Loads of music, loads of stuff going on. And just, this was the first time ever that music had been involved in a roll call. And really interesting, I'm not going to play it to you, but there's a really interesting interview between Jen Psaki and DJ Cassidy talking about how it all got arranged and what happened and, what was involved, etc., etc. And then you get stuff like this. So here's the Huffington Post doing a comparison between the DNC and the RNC in terms of the roll call.
We want to remind all our delegates, our alternates and guests that maintaining order during the roll call is extremely important.
It is our honor to cast 31 votes for our next president, Donald J. Trump.
If the convention is not in order, it's difficult for the secretary or presiding officer to hear the vote announcement.
Georgia, how do you cast your vote?
Yeah! Ladies and gentlemen, we are here tonight to officially nominate Kamala Harris for president. Bob, get loud, another round of shots. DNC, turn out for what?
In the spirit of good trouble, Georgia cast 123 votes for the next president of the United States, Kamala Harris.
Wyoming, the
So honestly, and that video just goes on comparing the RNC to the DNC and just the fun they're having, again, stagecraft and the excitement and the music. It was chalk and cheese, absolute chalk and cheese. Anyway, I digress. Let's go back to Pod Save America.
Very different tone than what we ultimately saw.
I am so glad that what we saw was a speech about Doug explaining why he loves.
So now we're going to go to Doug Emhoff, the first gentleman in waiting, really, for U.S. presidential nominee Kamala Harris, right? So he gave a speech, really short speech, really excellently executed speech, where it was lovely, it was really engaging, it was very unifying, and showed his devotion to Kamala Harris, but also, talked about all these other themes as well.
Kamala Harris. Oh, one other thing that Doug did that was so beautiful, really reminded me. So Bill Clinton, 1992. He said,
think about unifying
Murphy Brown and single mothers.
Everyone.
Said, if you don't feel welcome in the Republican Party, come and be part of our family. It was a beautiful moment. Basically standing up for lots of people whose families didn't look like the platonic ideal of 1950s television. And it was a big deal that Bill Clinton did that and said, there's a lot of people that live like that and deserve to feel loved. And there was something so beautiful about Doug just unapologetically, unabashedly saying, we're a blended family. They call her Mamala. She's an incredible stepmother. It was complicated. He said, I got divorced and we figured, and I figured out, and Kamala I thought she'd be good for our family, and she was. And that sort of direct honesty without feeling at all self-conscious. You have to pretend to be some other version just it was a recognition, by the way, of it's respect for people. It's respect for the viewer, for voters, that I really, really liked.
It's just being in touch with real life, not the refracted view of politics that we have, where it's you have to have this perfect marriage and your life has to go a certain way. And it's just comfort in your own skin. It's understanding this is what everyone knows, right? They know blended families. They know.
So when you are someone who sits outside of the norm in terms of nuclear family, and you're thinking which party represents me, you've got again a permission structure to feel inclined to vote for the Democrats here, where you've got Doug Emhoff saying, look, I got divorced, then I married Kamala Harris, and she took on my stepchildren as her own, and they call her Mamala. And we've got this extended family, and it's just not what you would normally expect a family to look like, and that's normal. This is now everyday American experience. These blended families,
mixed race couples. They know stepkids and stepmoms, and it's that's just normal stuff just presented to people, and it's not welcome or discussed about in the Republican Party in the same way.
Yeah. Well, because the primary strategy of the Republican Party, particularly under Trump, has been to otherize their opponents, Democrats, right? They are weird. They are different. Barack Obama wasn't born here.
Now we do the weird thing.
That's our thing now.
Kamala Harris is, the biracial thing. Is she Indian? Is she Indian? Is she black? Right? And I think a theme of tonight, we're going to talk about the Obamas as well, but from all three primetime speakers, Doug, Michelle Obama, and Barack Obama, was like, hey, we're pretty normal Americans in the year 2024. This is what the country looks like. This is what we sound like. Love our families, love our country. Like, it's a really powerful message.
Absolutely 100% there, total agreement. And then when you're talking about why are some of these speakers doing well, why do they seem so much better received by the audience than, say, JD Vance standing up? So Tim Walz, what was it about Tim Walz that got people absolutely electrified in a way that JD Vance didn't do and has subsequently failed to do in every single speech that he's given? And this is answered by Julia Dreyfus, actor who was originally in Seinfeld. Julia Louis Dreyfus. So she talks about this, asked by John Lovett here.
I was thinking about it because, so JD Vance says, I love Diet Mountain Dew. And I think that's disgusting.
Yeah.
You're gross.
Yeah.
Then Tim Walz says, I love Diet Mountain Dew. And I think I should try Diet Mountain Dew.
Okay, that's fascinating.
Well, it's because he has charisma. Of course, there's a policy difference, but Tim Walz is charming. He has it.
He's disarmingly charming.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times we try to make politics objective, but sometimes some people have it and some people don't have it.
Correct.
You have it.
Thank you.
You do, but you're beloved.
I'm not running for office. I'm not running for office.
You've played some of the biggest jerks. You've played beloved characters, but the same thing that carries them together is you have this charm, this charisma. What is it? What is
John,
it?
come on.
No, I want to know. What is it? Tim Walz has it. You have it. Kamala has it. Some people don't. Ted Cruz doesn't have it. What the fuck is it?
I think maybe they are sort of to what I said earlier. I think there's an authenticity in place. I think you're aware of the fact that JD Vance is not telling the truth about himself, and that you're picking up on that. Same is true of Cruz. Same is true of Kevin McCarthy. All of these guys, there is a, and by the way, we can differ on policy. There are Republicans that are affable and charming. They are.
Yeah.
There are. And but there is people can smell a fake.
Yeah.
I think.
Veep is...
and that's a really good point. So someone like JD Vance is suffering because people know what he said about Trump before and that he's done a 180 switch. So what's going on there? I smell disingenuousness. I smell a lack of being genuine here, a lack of authenticity, and that means that I don't trust you and I don't warm to you. Where someone like Tim Walz is out there being who he is, being that everyman, because that's who he is. He's laying it all out there. Doug Emhoff comes out and he lays it all out there. Kamala Harris actually comes out and does the same for herself. And so you feel an affinity for these people because they're normalizing politicians being politicians, and they just appeal to you in a much more genuine fashion. So now we're going to go to just a few bits of Kamala Harris's speech itself that I think, it's so well crafted. The whole speech, I could do what I did to Tim Walz's speech. It is so well crafted to deliver. So she starts with her biography because people don't know her, and she doesn't want to be painted the narrative painted by the Republicans. So she needs to paint her own. She needs to deliver her own story. But in delivering the story, she needs to also tick a load of boxes that are really important, such as who are we as a Democratic Party, what do we stand for, what are our themes. So when she delivered her biography, it's entirely about delivering those themes, and each thing she says is telling a story about who she is, and therefore who the party is, and therefore what you're voting for if you vote for the Harris Walz ticket. And there's policy to be hidden into that as well, and then it goes on to talk about elements of her as a prosecutor, and then draws towards the end, and at one stage talking about obviously having to tackle who Trump is in juxtaposition to who she is. But here's one element that I think is particularly well crafted in the speech here, this kind of third way through the speech.
As a prosecutor, when I had a case, I charged it not in the name of the victim, but in the name of the people.
Okay, so that's just a really, really freaking good way. By saying I was a prosecutor and I used to go in and say, this is not me delivering this and winning this case. This is we the people. I've talked about this already. One of the massive themes of this convention was unity. I am serving you. This is us together. We are running the country. I am your conduit. Yes, I am in power, but it's your power that I am representing, and I am working for you. In the same way as a prosecutor, I was working for you as we the people. And she does that so well, and then goes to who Trump is. And it's not we the people, it's me the Trump.
For a simple reason. In our system of justice, a harm against any one of us is a harm against all of us. And I would often explain this to console survivors of crime, to remind them no one should be made to fight alone. We are all in this together.
Bosh. Unity.
And every day in the courtroom, I stood proudly before a judge and I said 5 words: Kamala Harris for the people. And to be clear, my entire career, I've only had one client, the people.
Servant king. That's what she's drawing on there. I am serving the people. I only have one client. It is the people. I'm not serving myself. I am here for you. So powerfully done.
And so, on behalf of the people, on behalf of every American, regardless of party, race, gender, or the language your grandmother speaks, on behalf of my mother and everyone who has ever set out on their own unlikely journey, on behalf of Americans like the people I grew up with, people who work hard, chase their dreams, and look out for one another, on behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
So she could have just said, thank you very much. By the way, I really appreciate and I accept your nomination as the next president of the United States of America. But she goes through that process of going, these people, I'm representing you. And that could only happen in a country as great as, so then it brings in patriotism. And it's like unity, representing all of you, but I'm serving you. You're not serving me. And I'm so glad, I'm so proud to represent you as blah, 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 blah. Just so well crafted, and then just builds you up and you get that release. Absolutely really well done there. And we're going to go back to the Pod Save America team.
Sure. Anyway, thanks for your edit. One of the big issues in this election, and also one that she had been talking about as vice president for the last couple of years, is abortion rights. She hit that hard in the speech. Here's the key part.
And understand.
Actually, no, it's not the abortion part I wanted to go to. So this is a bit where she has to, and you've got to do this at some point, which is how do I tackle Trump? How do I tackle the opposition leader, the guy that I'm running against? And how do I take him down? So I think she did this pretty well, and the Pod Save team do as well.
Just didn't need that phrase.
Yeah.
You could have just gone without it. She did contrast with Trump throughout the speech. There was one longer section in the middle where she just went full prosecutor and laid out the case against Trump. Let's listen.
Donald Trump tried to throw away your votes. When he failed, he sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol where they assaulted law enforcement officers. When politicians in his own party begged him to call off the mob and send help, he did the opposite. He fanned the flames. And now, for an entirely different set of crimes, he was found guilty of fraud by a jury of everyday Americans and separately found liable for committing sexual abuse. And consider what he intends to do if we give him power again. Consider his explicit intent to set free violent extremists who assaulted those law enforcement officers at the Capitol.
And by the way, this is also in the context of having played, and some of the footage from this was previously unseen, a new kind of advert put together that viscerally reminds you of what took place on January the 6th. And the fact that he wants to free all of those people, which he's now said, is mind-blowing, because it was an absolutely it was a shocking advert that they played up on a big screen, and it shows the violence and the vitriol on show there. Incredibly emotive, powerful stuff.
His explicit intent to jail journalists, political opponents, and anyone he sees as the enemy. His explicit intent to deploy our active duty military against our own citizens. Consider the power he will have, especially after the United States Supreme Court just ruled that he would be immune from criminal prosecution. Just imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails, and how he would use the immense powers of the presidency of the United States, not to improve your life, not to strengthen our national security, but to serve the only client he has ever had, himself.
Bosh. So we heard about her only client was the people, you know, Kamala Harris for the people. You were my only client. His only client is he himself. Just those two clips need to go. I mean, obviously the whole speech goes together so absolutely brilliantly, but, you know, very good.
We've talked about this all week. I personally am not too big on, like, going through all of the bad things Trump has ever done, because I think people have mostly made up their minds about Trump, especially the voters that we need to win. But I thought that was really effective because she sort of brought the whole thing forward and said, calmly laid out what he had done in the past, and then said, well, and consider what he'll do in the future with this power. And she basically defined him as someone who has only cared about himself and who's not going to help you. So I thought that was pretty good. What do you guys think?
She also didn't make it a bunch of corny lines.
Yes.
She just laid it out simply. He sent a mob to the Capitol. He assaulted women. He was found guilty of fraud. He wants to pardon the January 6th insurrectionists and jail opponents and jail journalists. Imagine what he'll do next. Simple, powerful, got through it fast.
There was not a
really well said.
single corny line in this speech. And I thought there's a point earlier before this clip where she says he's an unserious man, but the consequence of his presidency is serious.
Yeah.
Which is exactly the right way to do it. And
so I think that was spot on. The other thing that they sing the praises the whole speech, but the foreign policy aspect was really important. And the way she built up to that was also really good to show that actually it has a prominence in her administration to be. So the context of this is that the foreign policy part of these speeches are usually not seen as the exciting things, and people don't really like foreign policy stuff on your big presidential speech to the country. They're voting for you to do stuff for them domestically, right? So foreign policy is a bit of a difficult one.
Going back, John.
All right, so I just want to say, Dan was wondering when he could go to the bathroom during the speech. He was wondering when the foreign policy section began, because that's when he was going to go to the bathroom.
But to the credit of the speechwriters, it was so short I couldn't go.
And it turns out, it was an incredibly powerful foreign policy section. Let's listen.
I will not cozy up to tyrants and dictators like Kim Jong-un who are rooting for Trump. They know he is easy to manipulate with flattery and favors. They know Trump won't hold autocrats accountable because he wants to be an autocrat himself.
Absolutely spot on.
And as president, I will never waver in defense of America's security and ideals, because in the enduring struggle between democracy and tyranny, I know where I stand and I know where the United States belongs.
I almost stood up and cheered at that part here in our studio. Tommy?
The foreign policy section sparkled on the red carpet tonight, John. I thought...
No mention of AUKUS.
It was really, there was no AUKUS.
What the fuck?
I mean, look...
Where was AUKUS?
Where's AUKUS? What about the Pacific Rim, Tommy? No mention of the Pacific Rim. Sorry.
Not enough rims. She looked and sounded tough as hell. She talked about combating autocrats. She talked about rallying NATO after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. She did something that, frankly, President Biden really struggled
They only played a few of the clips there, but she did do all these other things as well.
to do, which was talk about the humanity and suffering of the Palestinian people in a way that I found moving. And I thought it was good. Sometimes the foreign policy section drags. Okay, we know that. We know we are the redheaded stepchild of your little comms department, your little speech teams. But you know what? Tonight we shined.
Well, let me say. Here's what I'll say.
Okay,
I'm
Dan.
glad I didn't pee.
Thanks.
I have a long history of peeing during foreign policy speeches. In fact, I've never heard a word that Ben Rhodes has written.
You're gonna get a bladder infection.
and I'm glad I didn't go. It was good.
It's the nicest thing you've
I'm
ever
glad
said.
she did it.
I will say, watching that foreign policy section again, that was not just performance. That is that last clip that we heard. That is those are the way that she delivered. That is the delivery of someone who has been vice president, who has been around the world, who has dealt with foreign policy crises, who has sat in the Situation Room. You could.
This then goes back full circle, not full circle. This goes back to what Julia Dreyfus was saying, which was authenticity. As someone who's experienced that and genuinely feels the threat of Putin and autocrats around the world. And you could feel it from the way she delivered that. It was genuine there. And I absolutely agree.
Tell that she really felt that in
It's
a
confident.
way that when she was a candidate in 2020, maybe would not have delivered it that
Agreed.
authentically.
Yeah,
Agreed.
Several of the best moments throughout this convention have been people choosing not to process their disgust with sort of vitriolic sentences, but actually taking a step back. Obama did this, but AOC did this, Walz did this, Kamala does this, which is to step back and try to figure out why is this so outrageous? Why is it so ridiculous that we're in this situation? And that was one of the most moving moments of the entire speech, and it was in the foreign policy section, which we normally think is junk, Tommy.
I know, and I normally hate myself, but to your point about the authenticity of it, you're right. Normally, if you're a congressman or a governor or a senator and you're running for president, you're faking it.
Yeah.
You're cosplaying president. She has been in the Situation Room. She's been in the PDB. She has represented Joe Biden
in the PDB. Everyone knows
in
that.
the United States at the Munich Security Summit. Okay,
She's
been to ASEAN.
Yeah,
she's been to these national summits representing the United States.
How many G's has she been to?
G unit? I don't know. Many.
There's also something about her being a prosecutor too. One of the things that's been striking just over the past couple of years is we saw this with some of the indictments and how they're written. There's nothing that has disgusted law enforcement officials more than actually confronting the detailed evidence of Donald Trump's behavior. There is a kind of righteous indignation that comes with having been a law enforcement person, seeing the way Donald Trump conducts himself, and I appreciate that in this moment.
So yeah, really powerful stuff, and the whole DNC convention as a whole, which is very joyous and emotional, and just very, very well delivered. We're going on to now to very quickly. I'll try and wrap this up quickly. The Bulwark here, who are a conservative podcast of kind of never Trumpers, who are advocating for Harris. Because they think Trump is too much of a threat, etc., etc. Their question is, well, how is Trump reacting to all of this?
The consensus is it was a pretty good speech from Kamala Harris. How is Donald Trump taking it?
Yeah, I mean, we've been writing about this a lot, where it just doesn't seem like they have a response, right? I mean, like Donald Trump has very rarely been off balance in his political career. He's been insane. He's been like totally reprehensible all the time, but he always has seemed to have like his own center of gravity. And just since the switch to Kamala Harris, I mean, the flailing has been really unbelievable. And I think you kind of saw this in microcosm last night, because he had kind of set up and planned to have his like little live react. He was going to live tweet the speech. He was like, "Hey, I'm hanging out with my buddies. We're going to put the thing on the TV." He starts out live tweeting, "Here she comes into the arena. Like, enough of the personal stuff. Let's talk about the border." And then very, very early in the speech, the kind of like jocular, like, let's have fun making fun of Kamala thing just vanished. And it became, he was just yelling at the TV with his thumbs on the internet. I mean, like, it was crazy. Like and it seemed in large part because she very early in the speech was tweaking his criminal convictions and, you know, his behavior on January 6th and all of this stuff. And he starts, you know, tweeting, or what do you even say on True Social? I'm just gonna say tweeting. He starts tweeting in all caps, you know, like, is she talking about me? Like, these prosecutions were all started by her and Biden against her political opponent, me. She's lying again about Project 2025, which she knows, and so do all Democrats, that I have absolutely nothing to do with. And then, you know, just weird stuff. Walz was an assistant coach, not a coach. Where's Hunter? You know, and just completely. And then after the speech was over, he called into Fox News and just kind of ranted for 10 minutes. They eventually had to cut him off. He was pushing buttons on the touchpad on his phone with his face. You could hear in the call. And I mean, they literally had to cut him off in mid-sentence to end their program and go to Greg Gutfield. And so he was not done ranting. He then called into Newsmax and did a little more. I mean, Trump has always been kind of an unchained figure, and that has been to his political advantage in a lot of ways. But it just seems like he's totally rudderless right now as he tries to respond to Kamala Harris in a lot of ways. And I just think we have all been we're kind of dispositionally pessimists over here. And like, there's been a lot of data supporting pessimism for basically this whole cycle up until this swap. But I really do feel just in the last few days, like, okay, maybe it's possible to be too careful and too pessimistic about the fact that I really it does seem at this moment as though Kamala Harris is somewhat favored to win in November.
And, you know, they do a good job on that podcast talking about how the convention went through the middle ground, and it was attracting a lot of sort of GOPs, etc., etc. What then was happening at the same time as some of the speeches is that I think it was Arizona Trump was in, and the speeches he's giving are so low energy. This one, I mean, this is one of the more energetic excerpts of the Arizona speech you're just about to see, but it was just like, oh my goodness, have you given up? Like, is this getting to you? What's going on? Is he flailing? Is he rudderless?
Play this clip.
Every American was safer under President Trump. In fact, the entire world was safer when I sat behind that beautiful, resolute desk in the Oval Office. You know, I heard the other day for the first time, I heard Biden say, the beautiful, resolute desk. He never said that before. They copy me. When I say we're a nation in decline, guys are copying me. Then they say they shouldn't say that, but they thought the words were beautiful. But they copy me all the time. In that case, it was Republicans that were copying me because they...
And Donald Trump just started saying random words like, how disgusted we're all when we see, all of us when we see. Play the clip.
Who bought it all? How disgusted we're all when we see, all of us are, when we see 3 days ago when we viewed their parade.
I guess Donald Trump then tries.
And Ben Marsalis here goes through the speech in Arizona, just picking out just stuff where he's not making any sense or it's just really bad. There's one bit I was listening to Rory Stewart talk about how he was watching with his mum, who's quite right wing. I think it was at the Arizona speech where he was trying to say that, you know, immigrants are all like criminals, and was talking about crime also spiking, even though all the evidence is suggesting the opposite. But going through these incidences, like literally talking very explicitly in terms of this crime took place and explaining the crime and going through and Rory Stewart's mum was like, I think he's actually enjoying that. This weird situation where like he's getting off on talking about all these terrible crimes and, you know, trying to pin them all on the Democrats or something like that. And then, you know, you get stuff like this, just weird.
They're going at levels of speed that nobody thought was possible. Do you know?
No, we do think certain speeds are possible. Like, stop saying nobody thought that this many people could be here. Well, it's an arena. It's full. I think that's possible. Stop saying that stupid phrase.
That was our technology that was stolen by Russia. And Russia has them, and I started them very quickly. But somebody gave Russia, years ago, before me, all of our plans and specs for hypersonic missiles, and they built them, and we didn't. He said Bill Clinton. He could be. It might have been, in all fairness, might have been a little after Bill Clinton. I used to like Bill Clinton. Can you believe it? It could have been Barack Hussein Obama, perhaps. We should ask him. No, he was very nasty last night. I tried.
And as this is where we get onto like his choice of being personal, like doing personal attacks or not.
Try and be nice to people, you know, but it's a little tough when they get personal. Please, again, remember, please, sir, don't get personal. Talk about policy. Let me ask you about that. We're going to do a free poll. Here are the two questions. Should I get personal? Should I not get personal? Ready? Should I get personal? Should I not get personal? I don't know. My advisors are fired.
Now, that little bit at the end is the most important part there. That tells you his advisors are saying, please don't get personal. It is losing in the polls for you, and people are sick and tired of it. Stop getting super personal. If you go back to the Democratic convention, she wasn't personal. That's what the podcast, Pod Save America people said, that she just went through matter-of-factly, this is what Trump did, this is what Trump did, this is what Trump did, this is what Trump did. Imagine what he would do with another 4 years. How far would he take that? It's not like a personal insult. That's factual, just laying out what he did, rather than having childish attacks and calling names to Donald Trump. It's a very different way of doing things. Now, one of the things the Trump campaign is doing as a result of Waltz being a bit of a threat is they've issued a letter signed by 50 Republicans denouncing Waltz for misrepresenting his military service. The letter has 29 misrepresentations itself about the service of its signers, including a false claim by Ronnie Jackson as being a retired admiral. But anyway, the Midas Touch Network talks a lot about this. They're trying to really denigrate Waltz here because they realise that he is becoming quite the threat. He is that everyman, white, middle America everyman kind of guy who is seemingly very charismatic and becoming a successful speaker, and so they're trying to take down his military service. I think he did incorrectly claim at one point to have had weapons of war or something like that, and he didn't. He just come out and said, actually, no, I didn't. But anyway, and then you've got Fox News starting to fact check some people, be a little bit more careful. I mean, this is a guest.
About getting out the vote and making sure they talk to the voters, as Harris said on her show earlier. I think the one thing I would respectfully just disagree with President Trump when he talks about energy independence. We've never been more energy independent than in the history of America. We're doing 14 million barrels a day. When he talks about rebuilding industrial America, There was a manufacturing recession with him. Now we're building more factories in error. A Georgia battery plant, a Wisconsin semiconductor plant, a chip plant in Arizona. So I think that Vice President Harris has to make sure she gets out there and talk about all the things they've done. They passed infrastructure, a bipartisan infrastructure plan. President Trump talked about Infrastructure Week, never got passed. So I think they have a lot to run on, and they need to run on it.
So it's interesting that, there is a lot of positives for the Democrats to shout about in terms of the last 4 years. And particularly, the main thing that Trump achieved was a tax cut for the rich, right? He claimed every week that he's going to do an infrastructure bill, and it never happened. The Democrats took over and it happened. So, one thing as well that Trump's recently done is it's such a weird thing to have done. So this is on Truth Social. The highly overrated Jewish governor of the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, made a really bad and poorly delivered speech, blah, blah, blah. Why would you call him a Jewish governor? That's like saying the highly overrated black governor. Why are you trying to bring in that identifier unless it's for some reason? It just seems a little bit anti-Semitic here, and Josh Shapiro answers that.
Also said that you had not done anything for Israel, and yet he had. What's your response?
First off, I think it's clear over the last few weeks, Donald Trump is obsessed with me and obsessed with continuing to spew hate and division in our politics. He's someone who's routinely peddled anti-Semitic tropes like this. And look, remember, he's the guy who wanted Doug Mastriano to have this job. He's the guy who has been repeatedly rejected by the voters of Pennsylvania. He himself lost in 2020. All of his hand-picked candidates have lost. And I think he's heading for another loss, this time to Kamala Harris.
So on and so forth. He, in no uncertain terms, where he thinks Trump is at. Just because I've been going on for too long, it's interesting. Obviously, we know that RFK Jr. has pulled out, given some really spurious reasons for pulling out. He appears to be inauthentic himself. Trump's inauthentic too, because Trump had slagged off RFK Jr. only recently, saying, I'd rather have Biden over RFK Jr., right? And then he's like, yeah, come in, welcome in. And RFK Jr. had been slagging off Trump and is now like, yeah, I'll come in. So it's just like, it goes back to this idea of authenticity. When you start looking at all of the polls that come in, we're continuing to see big leads for Harris. Now, the question is, are these over-egging the reality? This happened with Trump before. Are there Trump voters, shy Trump voters who aren't honest with the surveys but vote differently, or they're undercounted for some reason? Then the flip side is, well, are the young people that are going to be mobilized and registered, they're going to be undercounted because there's no form on them, they've never voted before for the vast majority of the people we're talking about there. How accurate are polls? But they are showing continually Harris leads at the moment. The betting has been up and down. It's gone back to being tied. It went back towards Trump for some reason. I don't quite know why, but it's gone back to being tied. Harris ahead on the 538 Electoral College, 287 to 251 Electoral College votes. We've got all sorts of different polls that we could look at. So anyway, there you go. That's something to keep an eye on. And the last one was going to be this, which was, I think, Hispanic voters, Hispanic voter polling in some of these important places. So Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Texas. August, 60% voting for Harris, and it was in April 47% for Biden. Trump has gone from 34% down to 29%. Kennedy 12% to 7%. So in other words, Harris has stolen a whole bunch of Trump and Kennedy votes to Hispanic voters in those incredibly important battleground states. We'll see how that develops. Anyway, hopefully that was of use to you. It was a very long one. Do apologize. The next ones won't be so long. It's just that these were taking into account so much information and data. So thanks for persevering. Take care, guys, and speak to you soon.